Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast. I'm very excited by this particular subject. I am joined today by Dr. Anna Kruglova. Kruglova?
Yeah, that's correct.
Anna is a lecturer in terrorism studies at the University of Salford, and she has just published this year her first book, I believe, which is entitled Terrorist Recruitment, Propaganda and Branding, Selling Terror Online. And I'm fascinated by this subject. I think a lot of attention really should be paid, like a lot more attention should be paid to it. So with all that said, Anna, could I ask you to tell us a bit more about your background, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure, and looking forward to our discussion today. So my background is international relations, and then I did it in my country of origin, which is Russia. And then I moved to the UK 3 years ago to do my master's in security studies first at UCL. And then here comes the question, why would you do another master's? But that's exactly what I did. And I went to King's College to do a master's in international conflict studies. So basically I felt like I wanted to know more, and I wanted to have a more specific knowledge of the subject I was interested in. And that was the first time where we had a little bit more attention to terrorism studies. Also, that was the time where ISIS became active, and that was something that I kind of was following, but not from the professional point of view, but mostly just out of curiosity, I guess. And after this, I had a chance to do an internship with a think tank called Integrity UK, which is focusing on debunking biases and myths about the Muslim community. And I was assigned with a project based on ISIS's social media. So that was the first time when I saw things like, kitty cats pictures that everyone is probably now heard of, all these pizza parties that ISIS people would have, Nutella jars, etc., etc. So it completely changed my understanding and image of so-called terrorist propaganda, because you would usually expect something like battlefield scenes, or I don't know, the infamous beheadings videos. But it wasn't like this at all. It was completely different. It was very benign, very kind of almost entertaining. So this was really curious to me, and then I decided I wanted to explore this question further. And from having said that I will never come back to academia, I ended up doing my PhD and then ended up in academia, I guess, permanently now, which I'm pretty happy about. But yeah,
well,
that's the trajectory.
Yeah, you're in a very relevant field, though. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of attention paid to terrorist recruitment, mainly, I think, on the psychology of why people become involved in organizations. But that sort of does down the fact that and ISIS is the perfect example of the Islamic State, otherwise known as an ISIL, with various names, is a perfect example of how they got it right, which is they were actively recruiting from the whole planet. Effectively, they had a very, very vocal message. And could you tell us a bit more about those sort of techniques that they used to achieve this success?
Well, I was specifically, I mean, as you said, they did use different techniques, and in my research, I was focusing specifically on younger people, and I was curious to understand why people who similarly didn't have any particular attachment to religion very often, or didn't come from kind of background that would prompt people to as some
traditional Salafist.
Exactly. So why would they go and decide to join ISIS? And I was focusing specifically on this marketing approach where ISIS would use the so-called narrative advertisement, and this is the notion I borrowed from marketing, where you structure your propaganda in the form of a story, and I was looking at different outlets produced by ISIS, mainly their propagandist magazines, Dabik and Rumia, to uncover these stories and the narratives that the group was building. And the idea is that when you communicate with people through stories, they first of all become kind of immersed in a certain imaginary world, where they could become these heroes. You know, they have this attractive version of themselves, very kind of augmented reality where they could be whoever they want to be. And through that, you build a very strong emotional connection with your audience. So your target audience becomes very much emotionally involved in what you're producing and what you're showing to them. And then they become very much the advocates of your brand, quote unquote, or in the case of ISIS, the group. And at this moment, the rational judgment, which will tell you that, you know, it's not a good idea to go and join a terrorist group, is getting suspended, and you are so taken over by this feeling of excitement, feeling of this kind of being amazed about how good you are, how heroic you are, how amazing you are. You are taken over by this feeling, and your rational judgment is basically not in play anymore. And that's the way how for ISIS it becomes much easier to lure people into their propaganda first, and then kind of get them going further and get involved in violence activities or go into Syria, etc.
Yeah,
but of course they were. Yeah.
Sorry, I was sorry. Someone pointed out to me, they read your article actually and said about narrative storytelling, and they made an interesting point. They said effectively what ISIS did was, it's kind of like it's a classic story. So I compared it to Star Wars, which is they're sort of going, okay, you're identifying with this character. So there's this, you know, country kid who's yearning for something more, and then, oh wow, he's special and he has his special ability, and he then goes out and becomes the hero and defeats the evil empire. And this isn't, you know, I use Star Wars, but this is an ancient story that is repeated time again. It could be the Hunger Games, it could be Harry Potter, and it's kind of what ISIS did as well. I think they painted this, oh, you're not happy with your situation, why, you know, but we think you've got something to add, something to offer. Hey, come over here and you can be the hero. And I think that's
exactly.
It's a classic storytelling, and it's also of course used by big brand marketing. That's the same techniques. So I think it's absolutely fascinating that we look at this. And if I can ask, do we know how they got these techniques? Did they recruit particular, I mean obviously they recruited broadly, but were there any particular individuals who came with a sort of more advanced marketing background and sort of created these campaigns for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't know the names of specific marketing individuals, but I know for a fact that ISIS did recruit people with social media marketing experience, social media management, computer science. I think one of the people who was behind ISIS's English language media campaign was Junaid Hussain, who used to be a hacker, and then he went to fight to Syria, and he, as far as I know, became this kind of
again, the anti-social, anti-society, anti-authoritarian background, if you like.
Yeah, and then you also have person like Ahmad Abu Samra, who also is or was a computer science student, and he was also involved in filming ISIS's videos. He was behind this idea to basically attach GoPro cameras to AK-47s when they were doing, you know, stuff like Call of Jihad video games. So they really were. We just had this discussion with a researcher who you probably heard of, Colin Clark. He's the author of After the Caliphate, and he was giving a lecture here in the Netherlands, where I'm at the moment. talking about the role of social media in terrorist recruitment, and he was focusing on ISIS as well. And he was saying how, on the one hand, there is a tendency to see ISIS as something super new and super kind of different from everything we saw before, but essentially it's not true. They do display the same characteristics as kind of traditional terrorist groups, but the social media campaign, the level of how savvy they were with knowing their target audience, diversifying the message depending on who they were talking to, and they had several versions of the same magazines in different languages, which means that they could adjust the message not only in the content but also speaking with people in the language that would be closer to them. And of course, recruiting people who are millennials or zoomers or whoever you want to call these generations did help. And technologically savvy people did stand behind the campaign that was so effective. And you can see now, essentially, it's not new anymore, because so many other terrorist groups are now borrowing from ISIS and exploiting the same techniques in their propaganda. So in a sense, ISIS, you may argue that ISIS is dead in kind of flesh, and also probably are not particularly effective on internet anymore, but the heritage of ISIS still alive.
I think you're right. They were sort of both an evolution of what had come before and a pointer of where you could go with the new ideas and new technology. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, as you talked about Dabiq, I saw several issues in my time in Syria. Makes great for lighting fires, and some of the guys swore for using it as toilet paper, but very, very well produced. And as you say, you get multiple copies, multiple different languages. And that's the other thing, of course. ISIS were very clever in setting particular messages for particular groups. So in your article, which I'll link to at the end in the description, you talk about how for young Muslim men, they'd appeal to, for example, you're in amongst the kuffar, they're sexual degenerates, they're drunkards, they're druggies, you should be here. And then for people, for potential recruits in the Islamic world, they were saying, well, they're apostates, you're living amongst apostates, they're not true Muslims, there's corruption. So they were addressing certainly perceived and sometimes quite often genuine issues in those different cultures in different ways to get the same result, come here to the true caliphate. And of course they did that with women as well, didn't they? It was
they did.
Absolutely fascinating. What so you mentioned like other people are using this now. Any particular groups or institutions spring to mind?
I mean, the far right are actively using the same technique, which is probably ironic in the way that the far right and the jihadists are on kind of parallel side of the
I have a pet theory about that, actually, and it's something I observed from my time amongst the Kurds, which is and you quite often saw with ISIS stories in the West of, he was like a far right neo-Nazi in Germany, and then he went to Syria to fight, and that's because I think the psychology of extremists, it's kind of all the same. Like the actual appeal to that person, it quite often doesn't really matter what they're fighting for. It's more that they're looking for something, and they tend to fall into these. And that applies to left wing, right wing, Islamic extremists. Interestingly, talking about, I mentioned the appeal to Islamic men about sexual deviancy. I think we recently had a case, actually, espionage case in Germany. And I was amazed because he was a guard at the British Embassy and he was prosecuted for spying for Russia. And one of the things he really got upset about was the flying of the LGBT flag, which seems like a bizarre thing to get so upset about. You'll actually commit treason and espionage, but he did, and it's the same motivation that they use that ISIS use and other groups use as well. And so I'm dominating there, but we had that recent attack in Dover. The guy firebombed a reception center, and he arguably as much a failure of mental health care as terrorism, but he was motivated by the same sort of messaging, which is his message of fear, I think. But
no, absolutely. If you and I'm a kind of now transitioning more towards looking into the far right propaganda or conspiracy theories and disinformation, and again, I think in kind of our general understanding is that far right is different from the jihadists, and then jihadists are different from conspiracy theories. But if you look at it as a whole, you will notice that the narratives, as you said, are exactly the same. It's, you know, there's always the other, the enemy. There's always this idea that you are special, you are chosen to do something to save this world. I'm looking at QAnon now, and
I was going to say QAnon, the classic example.
Classic example. And we were approaching it first as here at ICCT, where I'm based at the moment. We were first thinking, based on research that has already been published, that maybe QAnon is going to have something special in the sense how they radicalize people. And of course, they have the details are different. So they do look at the pedophile ring and all this kind of stuff, the figure of Trump as a savior. But essentially, it's the same idea that you save the children. You are the hero who goes, knows something that other people don't know, and save the world. And it's fascinating how over the years and years and years, with all the technologies we have, all the advancement in all kinds of areas, the narratives that are persistent in terrorist propaganda or extremist propaganda are the same. And it's more amazing that they still work over all these years.
Which is why I find your work so fascinating, because you say marketing and branding, it's the same principles is used, and they probably won't like the association, but by big multinationals, it works. It's human psychology. I think the comparison with QAnon, I think that's absolutely spot on. And again, it's also the danger, I think, of recognizing the danger, which is you look at these groups, and QAnon and ISIS, I think, are great examples. Initially look at them and people don't take them seriously. Go, they're just a bunch of whack jobs, you know, a bunch of lunatics running around a desert or running around in their forums. And then something happens, you know, and you're like, oh, they took Mosul, or oh, they stormed the capital. And suddenly, why didn't we see this coming? Well, you just thought they were nutters, but they're not. They're mobilizing, you know, and it's intriguing. I think QAnon will be a very interesting study, and you obviously know more about it than me. Almost a decentralization that seems to be taking place. There doesn't seem to be, as far as I'm aware, a central figure involved. It seems almost to be this self-propagating idea. Or am I wrong with that?
You mean with QAnon specifically, or
with QAnon specifically? I mean, because things like ISIS, you normally have a basic, normally going back generations, but an ideological scholar or theorist. Whereas QAnon, I don't know, it just seems odd.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I've just started looking at Q, so anyone
well, maybe we'll have this conversation in a year or so after the Great Revolt.
I'm just Great Awakening. But I was just going to share a few observations that I made over the time that, well, since the storm of the Capitol started, and then what I'm observing now. It seems like if initially it started with the figure of Q and this secret CIA agent group who were sharing their secret information, it wasn't focusing on specific issues as Pizzagate, pedophile ring, from the savior, blah, blah, blah. Now, it literally seems it's like an umbrella for all kinds of crazy theories coming all together. Because what I see now on social media, because I spent the last 3 weeks looking at Gab accounts of QAnon followers, it's everything. It's lizard people. It's you know, Trump. It's anti-vaccination. It's what was it? Of course, the corrupt government, Masons, Illuminati,
Jews.
Jews, yes.
A repeat offender, apparently.
yes, and it's. Yeah, and now the figure of Q is, I was talking to some of the former members trying to understand the role of Q in all this, because also it's quite typical, but it's always fascinating to me how in many cases, the central figures may not necessarily call for violence explicitly. And Hugh has a Canton gap, apparently, which I was really surprised. And curiously, they explicitly say don't go and commit violent acts, which kind of contradicts to what people are doing.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very savvy strategy when, on the one hand, you kind of cover your bases. You're not calling for violence, but then you're saying, oh, take control. These sneaky government officials are ruining your country. They're ruining your life. They are after your children. They're going to steal and sell them to pedophiles.
Yeah.
Take control. And then obviously, even though you're not calling for violence directly, you kind of give the impetus to people to pick up the arms and go in. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of an implied message, but very strongly implied.
Yeah, and by communicating with each other and by discussing the things and kind of reconfirming them for each other, people become more radicalized, and Q is not even that important, but these conversations they have in these echo chambers are becoming, I think, more important when they essentially radicalize themselves, having these conversations over and over again. And I know, again, having talked to people who used to be in QAnon, sometimes they would spend hours and hours and hours watching the videos, talking to people. 8 hours a day, I was told, is the average number of hours people would spend on social media looking for more Q stuff, which is, I still get, I mean, I've been doing research on terrorism for quite a while, but still I'm fascinated with the way how deep people could go into the ideology or propaganda and just never come back, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess it does tap into that basic psychological need or appeal. Yeah, it is fascinating. I say maybe we'll have when you become more au fait with QAnon research, maybe we'll talk about that, because again, absolutely. it's one of those subjects that I've been watching for a while, and definitely, super iffy.
Yeah,
and that actually raises, I think, another point. Was what can government structures or institutions do to combat this radicalization, which is now in everyone's home to one extent or another? I mean, I think most of us know someone, probably quite often it's family members or whatever, and they'll come out with something, that's just crap, quite frankly. But there's this vast range of ideas and theories and conspiracies, and we've all seen them. We've all been exposed to. Some people buy them, some people don't. Some people buy bits of them. So what can we do, and what can institutions do? Is more control of social media going to be necessary?
Well, I don't think censorship is a good way to go in any case. And coming from Russia,
I
can't argue for this, because unfortunately my country is going through this whole craziness at the moment.
Be careful, you might fall out of a window.
I know, yeah. Better not to mention anything. But I think it's not about, and I'm always saying that closing access to anything is only creating more temptation to go and discover it.
Right.
And I think better way, like, I can't really come up with solutions. I would probably have been in the government if I could, but the things that I've noticed while doing my research and just exploring the way how government addressed ISIS's propaganda, for example, I think there was this period when the UK, the US, and the so-called global coalition was trying to come up with so-called counter-narratives. And I think the whole idea of counter-narratives is now very, very fashionable. And always when we talk about social media propaganda, you have to come up with counter-narratives. And this is only my opinion, but I think they were remarkably ineffective. And the reason for this is that they were just boring. It's as simple as that. I mean, you have a picture of a kitty cat and like funny guy in fancy uniform playing with a kitty cat and eating Nutella, and then you have, on the other hand, this man in this huge saying, don't go join ISIS because ISIS is bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simple marketing. What you're going to go for? You're not going to go for a Nokia advertisement and go and buy Nokia because it's not cool anymore. Well, maybe it's going to survive a nuclear apocalypse at this point because it's so viable and long-standing. But the success of iPhone is essentially
Was it marketing?
because it's marketing. It's conditioned by an image you have. So I think it's better not to talk about counter narratives, but it's better to, again, it's probably going to sound controversial, but we need to learn from ISIS and other groups in the ways how they use social media and what narratives they are using. And that's why I don't like counter narratives. I'm saying I'm
fight fire with fire.
Just,
just one little aside for you. Do you know Miles Caggins? He was the spokesperson for I can remember the name of the operation since I was part of it. The anti-ISIS operation, the coalition. He was the public spokesman. I did an interview with him years back for Overt Defense.
Yeah.
Really interesting guy, very much aware of the importance of informational warfare. I think he's just left the army, actually, but if you're interested, maybe I could send you contact details. It might be interesting for your research in the future. You might get the alternative side, you see, the counter.
Yeah.
So, he's a really, really good guy. Okay, Anna, I think we're about half hour in. And is there anything else you wish to add? Like, might be of interest?
Well, I think just to follow up on the very last question, I think the other point that I would like to make when we talk about how we can deal with the propaganda and specifically ISIS, etc. Very often politicians are saying we need to reach out to so-called mainstream clerics or mainstream community and etc. And it doesn't really matter whether it's the Islamic community or kind of usually when it's mainstream, people tend to refer to Islamic community, which I have issues with as well. But the idea is that same issue with kind of finding the way to talk to young people specifically, finding the way to adopt their language is relevant to who you choose as your agents.
Yeah.
And there is a brilliant book, which I often refer to by Hussein Kiswani, called Follow Me Akhi. And it's about the way how young Muslims are using social media. And one of the chapters is dedicated to the ways how young people would search for religious advice, for example. And the point they were making is that very often they would go to so-called mainstream clerics in mosques because they are boring. That's exactly what they're saying, that they would often refuse to talk about the issues that they would find maybe not religious, but nevertheless important for young people. Sex or what you do in particular situation, which is not reflected in Quran. And then they would go on social media, on YouTube, and they would find these YouTubers, Islamic YouTubers, who would actually try to discuss these things and give advice and maybe have Q&A sessions. And they would be so much more accessible and so much more in tune with what young people are looking for.
Yeah.
So I think it's also about who you collaborate with and finding the speakers who would be able to reach out to your target audience. Again, it's not necessarily the Muslim community, which I was focusing in my work on ISIS, but it's everyone. It's the any young community or not so young community. It's really about picking your spokespeople, if you will.
Yeah, and considering the West in particular has this huge marketing industry with all this expertise, they probably should be asking them.
Exactly.
Okay, I know they might not pay the big money, but hey, it's do something for your country. Make a campaign. Yeah.
Definitely so.
Yeah. Okay, and I think we can wrap up there. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure my viewers will think the same. I look forward
Thanks so
to
much,
maybe next time in Manchester, I'll treat you to a pint and we can have a proper conversation about this. I very much look forward to that.
Oh yeah, I would love to. Sounds great. Thanks so much for inviting me. That was
No
real
problem,
pleasure.
no problem. And for anyone interested in Anna's work, I'll put links to her book and to one of her articles, which is absolutely brilliant, in the description. So feel free to check that out. Thank you very much, Anna. And thank you
Thank
very
you,
much,
Ed.
everyone, for listening.